dear Agility. So, uh, dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, I'm a notorious bavardeur, so I will try to keep myself in the time allotted to me. I'm promising that I will be brief. So, quite a few things have already been said by previous speakers, especially Professor Jonis, about the idea of utopia. Yet, allow me to add some more thoughts in order to clear the conceptual path I'm to follow. The prolific use of the word utopia forces me here to adopt some restrictions which, while in some measure arbitrary, may allow us to fix ideas. Therefore, I take utopias, especially those falling indisputably in the literary genre of social utopias, to be narrative descriptions of a possible world which is yet unlikely to occur as an actual state of affairs. As descriptions, they imply a set of counterfactual conditionals. For instance, if there were no private property, then there would be no envy or unhappiness in this world. Moreover, utopias are descriptions of a possible world in the sense that the conditional's hypothetical satisfaction is expected not to cause any internal contradiction to the state of affairs which they portray. I propose to avoid the potential use of the word utopia for longings for how things should be or projections of something that is better than it actually is, a tendency that we owe mostly to Ernst Bloch. Following Leszek Kolakowski's suggestion in his tunnel lectures, one should rather restrict the reference of the term utopia to states of definitive and unsurpassable perfection, which are still attainable through human effort. This condition, though, rules out all imaginary depictions of states of affairs that are the outcome of natural or otherwise unintended processes, or even the working of the apocalyptic presence of some deus ex machina. Utopias are something that, supposedly at least, only we humans are to consciously make true. Yet, while possible in this sense, the states of affairs described by utopias remain extremely unlikely to take place because of our very condition of human frailty and finitude. Utopias function thus as sets of ideas limits that are to provide guidance and orientation to our efforts, but not meant to be ever completely achieved. I would like now to turn to a charge that is often raised nowadays against utopias and utopian thinking. It is true that a common theme, as well as a core idea of most literary utopias, is that of a universal brotherhood. Yet, it has been pointed out that any attempt to implement this idea is bound to produce a highly despotic society, which, to simulate the impossible perfection, will stifle the expression of conflict and thus destroy the life of culture by totalitarian coercion. There is actually something inherently contradictory to the idea of a politically enacted and politically enforced condition of universal fraternity. And there have been many, especially after the demise of Soviet regimes, that are blaming this very idea of universal brotherhood and its actual political connotations for the degeneration of the literary genre into hors la mode science fiction. Nevertheless, what is common to all these critical views is the fact that they seem to understand the idea of universal fraternity solely as an end result of the utopian project. That is, as a state of affairs, among others, to be achieved or brought about through human effort under the guidance of the utopian script. Universal fraternity is taken thus as a semantic feature, or at best, a perlocutionary effect of the utopian narrative. What such views seem to miss, though, is that the idea of universal brotherhood may be crucially present as a necessary feature of the pragmatics of utopian discourse. As narrative expression of both artistic as well as theoretical imagination, utopias should also be considered as performances which by their narrative enactment address the wide public, actual or future, aiming to persuade and arouse it to action. Their performative function then would be to invite or even incite the individual addressees to participate in a wide collective action for the definitive reformation of the social world. One is tempted to understand them as a narrative call to arms. Brothers, let's make our world the best possible. My point then is that utopian discourse, through its performative function, succinctly foreshadows or implicitly evokes a type of collective agency to whom the realization of utopia is entrusted. The universalistic character of its discursive address determines thus the scope of utopia's practical reach by structuring its collective subject. Who might this agent be? Let me try cursorily for the rest of my time to review some probable answers. So, one should rule out from the beginning all cases where the universal audience of utopian performance is understood as a collection of individuals whose uncoordinated action, stemming out of any possible motive, may result to the bringing about of the state of affairs envisioned by utopia. As I have already stressed at the beginning, utopias are meant to be realized through conscious joint effort of humanity, not as an unintended consequence of random action of a multitude of individual agents. Thus, say, a neoliberal utopia is simply not a utopia, unless joint action is confined to the conscious obedience to the strictures enacted by a central coordinating agency able to enforce them, turning thus neoliberalism into a statist ideology. Nor can one, for much the same reason, ascribe the role of utopia's collective agency to the multitude conceived in terms of mob, that is, of a collection of individuals driven by a similar set of psychological motives or existential impulses towards a common goal, as the idea of la folla or la foule, exalted by the Italian futurists or Sorelian anarchists, would have it. The collective effort to which utopia aims at, arousing for its realization, requires a stronger idea of a common goal than that which anyone, even everyone, all of us may have, but only for ourselves. Making utopia true needs to be something that one wants not just for oneself, but because and in view that this is what the others want also to achieve through their mobilization. Participation in the collective effort for bringing about the state of affairs narratively described in Utopias necessarily implies coordinated social action through reciprocal recognition. Each individual participant is compelled to recognize other participants, in principle on an equal footing with him or her, by simply having to take them in account in setting to act in coordination with them for the realization of the utopian scheme. Moreover, concurrence of individual goals and reciprocity may allow for the continuity and persistence of some scheme of social coordination, for instance, driving on the left or the right side of the road, yet utterly, they cannot possibly suffice for actively establishing a drastically new form of social organization, unless individual participants can raise claims towards their fellow participants for the latter to do their part in jointly acting with the first in order to make utopia real. But this in turn implies that setting for oneself the goal of making utopia true is something one does not only in view of the fact that the others do the same, but also that one necessarily adopts the realization of utopia as a goal that each and everyone else should also have and assume that others in fact do likewise. And this can only mean that individual addressees of utopian discourse are assumed to interconnect into a scheme of social coordination for the common purpose of utopia's realization only on the basis of categorical, that is, moral reasons. Yet, this latter condition of categorical character necessarily affects also the content of the condition of reciprocity, the second condition. Since each and everyone are presumed to recognize each and everyone else as being equally able to freely hold moral ideals and act upon them in common with others. Therefore, identity of purpose, reciprocity, and moral character jointly entail a we subject. They entail a we subject, which is able to collectively bring about social reformation through providing an omnilateral basis to the bindingness of each one's duty to perform one's own part, while at the same time ensuring what has been called the separatedness or independence of each and every individual member thereof. This wished subject is not just a coordinated multitude, but a multitude engaged in a cooperative scheme, which interconnects all of its members to each and every one with a special moral bond of associative fidelity. In other words, as a universal brotherhood. This collective agent, which lies dormant in the pragmatics of utopian discourse, is of itself a quite utopian idea. And giving rise to it may in fact make room for gerrymandering and totalitarian-minded manipulation. Yet, in its inception as the collective subject of utopia, this we subject possesses the necessary conceptual resources, especially its entailing the guaranteed separatedness of its individual members as moral persons, to undercut all charges of supposedly inherent totalitarianism. Thank you so much. That's it. Sooner than expected, maybe.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takis. Actually, we're very, very punctual. We are ahead of our schedule, so this is very good. So